Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of the you know, if we weren't live, I would probably just go back and start the whole thing again.
Let's just rewind that a little bit. Let's sneak your strip.
You know, I've done it so many times, I just take it for granted that I can do it, and I don't practice it. Maybe I should practice in the mirror. We're going to pretend like I'm going to edit this out for the audio version, but we all know I'm not. So, hooray! Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I am your host, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, the honorary chairman of National Taco Day. So I hope you all had your tacos today. Didn't want to miss out on that high and holy holiday, especially in California. So we had tacos for dinner too. So, you know, we try to stay.
I didn't get my invite. Aaron, did you get an invite up to their house for dinner for Taco Tuesday?
No, I did not. He's a pretty terrible political activist.
Yeah,
there might be over your words, and he doesn't invite us for Taco Tuesday. I quit. I'm done with you people.
Wow.
Yeah, Molly, you're missing the point. The more people I have over, the less tacos I have. It's just simple math, okay?
Okay.
Just simple math.
As long as it's not a personal thing.
I'm Alton Gansky and really had nothing to do with National Taco Day. Just found out about it. And I'm the author of about 50 works, most of them book-length novels. Well, all novels are book-length. Book-length fiction, and then some nonfiction also.
And I am Molly Jo Riley, producer of the First in Fiction podcast. I am the author of the Unemployment Cookbook and the upcoming mystery location novel NOLA. And as producer, it is my duty to facilitate chat in the chat room. And already we have a comment from Jacqueline Patterson, who says she just finished The Blood Sword, so she's kind of mad at Aaron right now.
Yeah. About that. It's a fantastic ending. The book will change your life. And sorry, Jacqueline, book 3 is done, so just waiting for a contract, and then you can satisfy all your curiosity. So.
Okay.
I can see that Molly's protesting because she's not putting her lower third up there, so.
I protest. I am in protest of not having tacos for dinner.
Yeah, and so he stripped away the lower third on the video.
I want to thank you for calling me out on that publicly there, Al. That was just freaking awesome of you.
You know, I do what I can.
That's how we do things.
I think this is going to be a really interesting podcast tonight.
Oh my goodness.
Take over, Aaron. Take over. Be our leader.
I didn't even give my name, so you're saying take over Aaron, and people are like, who's this Aaron character? He didn't even introduce himself properly. So we're going to try and make this happen. Thanks, guys. It's informal tonight. We're just hanging out with some friends here. We do thank you for those of you who are watching us on YouTube. Please hit that thumbs up button. Helps us out quite a bit. And don't forget to subscribe. Had some more subscribers coming in this week, so really excited about that.
Don't let this beginning put you off on any of those things.
Really, for reals. Go watch all my other intros. They are flawless.
Most of the intros are flawless.
Yeah. And if those of you listening to the audio only version, you can join us live at aarongansky.com Tuesday night, 6:30 in the p.m. Pacific Standard Time. No, that's kind of late for some of you East Coasters. Sadly, it's what works in our schedules. So that's what we can do. So we do appreciate if you are on the East Coast and you join us live. Awesome. Thank you very much. You night owls. I fall asleep at 8:30, so that's my bedtime. And a bit of a promo here. Pops, you mentioned this last week about you released another novel, Finder's Fee, and it's revised and updated and available as an ebook. Is that correct?
Well, and a physical book too, though I'm still having to work out a few things with the Amazon source because it's linking to, well, it's not the wrong books, but to a previous version that are being handled by third-party people. So you're buying used books and stuff like that. But Finder's Fee is out, and it's available on all the major ebook carriers. And then the physical book you can also get through Amazon. You'll just have to look a little harder for it. So just search for Alton Gansky. Go down and choose the physical book that has the blue cover and the DNA strand on it, and you'll be getting the up-to-date one with that. Yeah, Finder's Fee just did a thing on YouTube about it. Just posted a little blurb. So.
Nice.
Cool. So blue cover with the DNA strand.
Yep.
The title is Finder's Fee. and I'm a little ashamed to admit on air that I have not read all of your novels.
Oh, that's it. I'm out of here.
All this on-air stuff tonight.
Well, here's the thing, though. You write so many. I was going strong, and then boom, college hit, and I had a family and children being born and a day job, and
So you're saying your priorities are all messed up?
really, I put my family in front of your book.
Yeah.
So tie, if you don't mind, together, because you did the book cover for this. I'm assuming, is that correct?
Yeah.
So how does the title work with the cover art? What's the story here?
Finder's Fee, of course, is a little play on words. The main character is Judith Find. She's a multimillionaire leader of a big corporation that does interior design and stuff like that. Think Martha Stewart kind of thing.
I want to be her.
And she comes into her office in the morning, and she's always getting packages, because companies send her samples and stuff like that. One of them begins to ring. She finds there's a cell phone in it, and when she answers the cell phone, it says, a mechanical voice says, "If you hang up, he will die." And that's the beginning. So Judith Find has to figure out what's going on, and it starts a massive hunt, kind of a thriller. And she's put together with somebody she doesn't know whether she should trust or not, and then the DNA strand relates to some genetic manipulation and the like. So, fun book.
Sounds devious.
Yeah, it's mean. It's devious. We bounce around from Fresno to San Diego and down your way, really, upland and stuff like that. So, kind of all over the place.
I actually have a book coming out next week, theoretically next Tuesday, that takes place in well, among other places, San Diego and Fresno, and it's a bit of a thriller itself. And I haven't read this book, so now everybody's going to read both of these because they're good listeners, and they're going to buy Finder's Fee, and they're going to buy Who is Harrison Sawyer when that releases, and they're going to think that we are in somehow cahoots together, that you've somehow influenced my writing, which is just obscene to think that
that's a little absurd, yeah.
Influenced my writing in some way. We all know that's absolutely not true at all.
Okay.
My book takes place in NOLA, and I've never been to NOLA, New Orleans. And you guys are writing books about places you've been, and now I'm beginning to wonder if really I should write about the high desert, and that just makes me so sad.
I've written about Somalia and Antarctica and outer space.
You were there, right? I mean, you slept with the penguins, right?
Well, now that you mention it, no.
You had to cozy up for warmth. All right. So let's ask the author, shall we? Jenny Snow, and she's been good enough to send us several questions over the week. So thank you, Jenny, a regular listener of ours and just a classy human being. So she wants to know, she writes in via Facebook, and she says, what about italics? How often should inner thoughts be italicized when writing in third person? My answer is, I don't know. Just let the editors deal with it. Okay, moving on. No, that's not enough? Okay. I do feel like there is something to be said for that because each individual publisher is going to have their own kind of a style guide. They're going to want things done in a particular way. I've seen in third person and in first person both where interior monologue is italicized. I'm okay with that. When I'm writing in third person, I typically don't. And it's not because I subscribe to any particular school of thought about italics. I don't, have a strong aversion to italics the way I do exclamation points and ellipses. But for me, it's a little more natural. I think the reader gets it, and that they're able to make that connection. Now, that being said, I've been flagged several times by editors saying, is this interior monologue? Because if it's not, then it's it's a slip in point of view. And so in order to keep your point of view consistent, a lot of writers use the italics just to remind people that this is something their character is thinking at that particular time. But this really is one where I'm not super in one camp or the other. I don't have strong feelings about it. I think each author can kind of make their own decision. And I do really believe that the editors and publishers will come through and they'll say, hey, we want it this way, or we don't want it that way. And now, Pops, here's the time where you correct me publicly.
Ready for the slapdown. More and more people are using italics. Writers are using italics for that inner monologue, where a thought is voiced, except of course it's not voiced literally. Only the character has that. It used to be italics were used either for emphasis. You're going to use it as a special strong word, though most writers are getting away from that. Most editors are getting away from that. Or it used to be used for foreign phrases. C'est la vie. For example, you have somebody says c'est la vie, and you used to put that in italics. And of course, the purpose of that was to indicate that the foreign term was, well, foreign, and therefore was emphasized. Then it became, you did that once. After that, you didn't do that anytime you use that phrase again. And that's, getting a little awkward. Let me talk about where it is today. Today, most publishers want all internal monologue to be italicized. And you mentioned one of the reasons for that is it looks like a point of view shift if you don't, because you're writing in third person, and then in the monologue, the mental monologue, you're getting somebody using personal pronouns like I, first person personal pronouns, I and me, and stuff like that. So it looks like a point of view shift. So that can get confusing for readers. So you put it in italics. The other thing it does is it gets rid of an attribution, and go back and look at some of the programs we've done on attributions with that, because if you don't do that, then you'd have to say he thought, if you don't put it in italics. So you used to put it in quotes, put the word like it was being spoken, and the problem is the reader would think that they're reading something that's spoken out loud, and then they would read the phrase he thought. So better the italics. If you're going to go with the dialogue tag, never ever, please, I'm begging you, don't say he thought to himself. Who else would he think to? He just thought. He didn't, that's just, there are a bunch of weasel words in there. It's just he thought. But better to use the italics. One other thing about italics, since we're talking about that, and my suggestion would be not to do that too often. It should be done sparingly and only when needed. But italics can occasionally be used for dialogue that comes over in some unusual way, like electronics. For a while, we were doing italics when you were talking to someone on the phone, and I helped the person on the phone talking. But then I had to away from that, so I stopped doing that. But in one of my books, I had to do it for several very good reasons. In Zero G, I have a shuttle mission, and the astronauts are dying, and there's only 2 that are left, and those 2 look like they're going to die. And so they're talking to the ground, so it's coming to them by radio from NASA, from ground control. And so I put all the stuff from ground control in italics. The reason is I had that voice, then I had my character's voice, and then I had the other astronaut, the dying astronaut's voice. And so it was getting very confusing as who was saying what. So to avoid a lot of dialogue tags, I did the electronic communication in italics. But that's rare. Do that only if you have to, or if you have a complicated situation there. So more than you want to know.
Makes me want to read the book.
Be my guest.
I read the book and it was fabulous. That's what I meant.
I had people like the behind the scenes stuff. I had the worst time figuring out how to kill astronauts while they're in space. That was just a toughie.
Say that again?
The story begins with a shuttle mission. We have astronauts on board, and they begin to die. Right. I had to figure out how to make them die. And that took me forever to figure out. And most likely what I suggest wouldn't work anyway. So,
wow.
Because of all the safety features?
Yeah. Obviously you're not going to send a killer up there with them unless you make one of the astronauts a killer, or that wasn't part of the story. It wasn't that kind of story. So somehow you have to murder people who are 200 miles away from you that you can't reach. 200 miles in space, and you can't reach them. So that was a real migraine for a while.
Well, it
Okay, then.
seems super easy. I think about that all the time.
That's right. As you go to sleep at night.
How about you, Molly?
Staying away from you guys for a while now. You murderers. First, Dave Fessenden in the chat room says italics can be very hard to read in large blocks of type. Most publishers tend to avoid that. And he ended his sentence with ellipses. So I just had to say thanks for that, Dave. He also says he had a publisher that didn't ever want him to put internal monologue in italics. It looks awful, but that's what they wanted. And then he says 0G is just about his favorite.
I love that guy.
Yeah, figured you would.
Yeah.
So my answer, editorially, I use italics in place of writing the he or she thought. The fact that it's already in italics shows it's a thought, so it is redundant to narrate the action as well. What you were saying, Al, you don't have to say after he thought to himself or he thought. When writing in third person, I would advise omitting as much of it as possible because third person point of view basically sets your reader a bit outside the action already. And so to bring them into your character's head with thoughts can be somewhat distracting unless it's done really well. I suggest the great show don't tell method. And if you feel your character's thoughts are worth sharing throughout the story, you may want to change the POV to first person.
Okay. And Pops, you mentioned using italics for emphasis, that used to be done, not so much anymore. I feel the same way about italics and formatting of fonts the way I do about punctuation. I feel like it can sometimes be somewhat melodramatic, like an ellipses, let's say, or an exclamation point.
I love the proper use of ellipses.
I know. I'm in the minority here. The thing about ellipses
is that they're misused a lot. That's
if
the
they
problem.
Turn your son into Christopher Walken.
I was doing the ellipses pause. All right, and moving on. But Pops, you said you would never to say he thought to himself, or who else would they think to? I'm actually working on a novel that with a telepathic person, so they do think to other people. So that was a lot of fun. A lot of italics there because they are thinking to each other, but it is still technically dialogue. So there's dialogue in italics. That got a little bit that got to be a bit of a beast balancing, but I think it worked out okay. It's also in multiple first-person perspectives, so it breaks the mold a little bit. It breaks the mold. So that's a lot of fun. Now, shall we move on to our main topic, our topic of the evening here?
I say yes.
Tonight we're talking about hearing voices. And Molly, I loved your little video. What's that? What do you say?
What?
Kill all of the astronauts? Of course.
No.
So we're not talking about psychopaths.
Thank you.
Though I think at some point most writers feel like psychopaths because we maybe hear our characters' voices in our head. But what we're not talking about is not necessarily character voice. We're talking about the voice of the narrator. And this is really hard to do. This is what at Antioch they called finding your voice. And it was for lack of a better term, it was a rite of passage. And when I first showed up at Antioch, one of the first questions, have you found your voice? Do you know what your voice is? And I'm like, I'm speaking right now. I think I'm well acquainted with, no, your writing voice.
And for new listeners, Antioch is where Aaron got his Master of Fine Arts, creative writing.
Yeah, that's where I got my MFA. I went there thinking I already knew everything and learned very quickly that I knew nothing. So it was fantastic. But we even had a particular mentor there. And when it came time to select your mentors, you talk with the other students. Who should I pick? Who's going to be a good match for me? And there was one mentor in particular that almost every student had at some point, because she was the voice whisperer. She would...
nice.
Yeah, that's really what it boils down to. She would help you find your own unique voice. And what we mean by that is the culmination, if we want to use a very fancy term, voice is really the culmination of your personal writing style. If you read The Hand of Adonai and you read The Bargain, you can kind of tell it's written by the same person. I use a lot of the same techniques. I use a lot of the same strategies, a lot of imagery, a lot of figurative language, all that kind of stuff. I've got a particular way of writing. And that's the challenge, I think, for most writers, is to be able to have a voice that differentiates them. If you watch TV, perhaps you're watching The Voice, which is on. I have a friend, well, I know somebody who's on it and doing well. So hooray for that. But one of the things that's interesting about that show is they're looking for unique, interesting voices. If you go up and you sound just like so-and-so, you may not get selected, because they don't want, you don't want to sound exactly like Frank Sinatra, because Frank Sinatra was Frank Sinatra. You should be you. And so same thing goes for writers. This can range from anything from the number of adverbs and adjectives to the types of adverbs and adjectives, or to the complete elimination of adverbs and adjectives. This could be sentence structures. And they've got people much smarter than me who have analyzed these types of things. And I remember very vividly, and this is on topic here, the day when I met with the mentor at Antioch, who is the voice whisperer, and I was in a workshop with her. And I remember submitting a particular story. I still remember it. And I was really nervous about it. And everybody workshopped it, got some good reviews. And she looked at me and she goes, "You found your voice." And she's like, "This is, you really know what your voice is and you're using it properly." And so I was like, "Oh, like, hooray, I've accomplished something great here." So it's a great thing. How do you build your voice? There are lots of ways, but I think that each writer on their entry level position, if you will, they're beginning their writing journey, they're going to experiment with lots of different types of writers. And they're going to try on their Ernest Hemingway voice, and they're going to try on their, F. Scott Fitzgerald voice, and their Flannery O'Connor voice, etc. When we first learn to sing, we're not making up our own songs. We're singing other people's songs, right, before we write our own. Eventually, you get to that point where you can write your own music and your own songs and sing in a way that is unique and memorable. And the same thing with writing. We want to be unique and memorable with our voice.
Yeah, and this is something that it has to come out of you internally. It is, it's very difficult. We talked about it earlier, I think, before the show started. It's like nailing Jello to the wall. How do you teach people to find their voice? Well, that's really the thing, is you can learn craft, but you have to discover some things. And a writer discovers voice. A writer doesn't create voice. A writer discovers their voice. And the only way you can really do that is to pound out words, start writing. And then your personality will begin to infuse into the work. Most of us can recognize someone else's voice in their writing, but we sweat bullets about whether or not we're going to do that. And I would suggest, don't worry about that. Just start writing and let it come forward with that. So if we compare some writers' voices, let's pull from science fiction for a bit. If you compare Ray Bradbury to Isaac Asimov, you can tell there's a big difference. If you compare them to Arthur C. Clarke, even more difference. Ben Bova, more difference. A guy named Spider Robinson used to be one of my favorite writers. All of these from science fiction now. You'll see a wide variety of approach in their voice. Bradbury borders on purple prose at times. Read Fahrenheit 451. It's very expressive, almost poetic at times. There's rhythm in the words. It's just superior writing. Most people can't get that close to purple prose without crossing the line. He could. It's ornate and kind of lyrical. Asimov is more direct and to the point. He doesn't do that. There's not much flowery stuff in his work. Then you move to Ben Bova, who it's Dr. Ben Bova now. It's his emphasis was on science technique. So he's sort of a hardcore science fiction writer, where Ray Bradbury wasn't. He was really more a fantasy writer that had science overtones on it. And then if you go to Spider Robinson, was one of the funniest guys, or is one of the funniest guys writing. The Callahan Barr series is worth reading. It's got lots of chuckles in it. But he's at times crude, graphic, sort of, I think of him as blue collar kind of writer. He describes himself as an old hippie, but just quality writer, but he's very different from that. So if you put Spider Robinson next to Ray Bradbury, you're gonna get good stories, but their voices are very, very different. And you can do this for anyone. Take Tom Clancy. He has a very unique voice. Cussler, Kuntz, all of them, King. It's hard to not recognize a Stephen King novel. And so what we're talking about here is no one would confuse the writing of Thomas Wolfe with his contemporary. They knew each other. Hemingway, they're very, very different. Hemingway liked those very short sentences. Many years ago, they did a takeoff of great writers if they were sports reporters. Mm-hmm. And the guy that did Hemingway was amazing. See if I can remember part of the script. I was talking about a football game, and he wrote it like Hemingway. He ran hard. He ran hard and he ran fast. He ran hard and fast and long. He ran hard and fast and long and reached beyond anyone's capabilities. Hard and fast he reached, and he caught the ball. All right. Thomas Wolfe was rolling over in his grave with that, as many writers would be. We can't write that way. Hemingway could. Now, that was a joke, of course. It was a takeoff, a riff on Hemingway, but no one's going to match Hemingway. That was his voice. And once he found that, off to the races.
Is that another figurative language there, another metaphor, off to the races?
Off to the races for the Hemingway one, yeah.
Yeah, so, which is great. And I love that. I was actually going to ask you to do that, Pops. I still remember you saying that before. I love that one. I still want to hear what Fitzgerald would do with the sportscasting. But, Hemingway, very famously a minimalist. And you can even look, and here's an interesting study. Look at Raymond Carver. Look at the stuff that he produced under Gordon Lish, and then look at the stuff that he produced after Gordon Lish. You want to talk about a shift in voice?
Gordon Lish being his editor.
Yeah, thank you. So Carver was the writer, Lish was his editor, and Carver, if you're not familiar with the story, would send in these great works of art, and Lish would just tear them up, and in some cases print a 2-page story that had originally started at 7 or 8 pages. And so he would cut, 65, 70, 85% of a lot of the stories. And so you can't do that without compromising voice. And so Carver's voice, while it's similar between his early works and his later works, there's a vast difference between the two. And his voice really shifted when he started working with a different editor. I think what you see in his early work is a voice that was found through collaboration between Lish and Carver. Most good editors will not edit your voice. And Molly, we talked about this, right?
Yes.
Because I was working on NOLA, and you eventually had to sit me down and say,
stop.
You're changing my voice. This is not how I write. And I said, but everybody should write like me.
Yes. I think that is kind of what you said. And I said, I took it to my critique group, and they hate it, and they can tell that it's no longer my writing.
And that's because when you try and write like me, it's not Molly. And what people want is Molly. If they pick up a Molly Jo Reilly book, they want to read Molly Jo Reilly. They're not really interested in reading Gansky right now. And that's fine. And that's why it's important to find your own voice. That's why I said good editors will not edit voice. I'm not putting myself in the category of good editors, by the way. So, and that's always a challenge for editors to find that middle ground. And Molly, you were asking here on the show notes about the difference between author voice and character voice.
Yes. You guys addressed it already, but I said for this podcast, we're discussing the author voice, not character voice. But I wanted to know if they fall into the same categories or if that's a separate topic.
They can overlap. And as Aaron's going to lead us through some of these different types of writing voices, some of the examples are done from first-person books. So it's the character who's doing the speaking. But what you're seeing is the writer expressing himself or herself through the character. So sometimes they overlap. First person's a little harder to tell if he's just creating the character that isn't really his voice. Well, that's kind of hard to do. So I just finished doing the next book in the Harbinger series, and I have to write in first person. and I have to become that character and use that character's voice. So sometimes there's a little difference, but they definitely overlap.
Absolutely. Character voices are important as well, but the voice of the narrator is really what we're talking about here. And of course, in first person, your narrator is a character. Third person, not so much. But I would even argue that even in third person, your narrator becomes the type of a character.
So are we saying that voice is, I'm still trying to nail the gel out of the wall here. Voice isn't what you say, it is how you say it as a writer. It is the way the words go on the page. It is the fingerprint of the writer more than it is anything else.
Absolutely. I completely agree. You said that very beautifully with wonderful metaphors. And that's how I like to explain things. So thank you for doing that. It's the thumbprint. It's the fingerprint. It is all of the elements of style rolled together. And this includes things that range from diction to figurative language, to the use of imagery, to tone, to mood, to the connotations and denotations of each word. I mean, and this stuff has been broken down for eons, maybe not that long, but definitely for centuries, I think we could say. If not, it's been definitely pulled apart for decades, since we got guys like Hemingway and Fitzgerald and this big literary movement, modern American literature, and people pulling the style apart. But you could go back even further than that and find people. Edgar Allan Poe made a living at first, not by writing fiction, but by critiquing fiction and poetry and analyzing style and saying what's good and what's bad. And so as long as literature has existed, there have always been critics, and these people have analyzed style and the sum of the choices that the author makes in order to produce a work.
I just came up with another example because most people are familiar with the Twilight Zone, the old Twilight Zone with Rod Serling. I, to this day, can pick out every Rod Serling script that he wrote based on the dialogue. Without seeing it, if I just hear the way the dialogue is delivered, I know, or some of the movies that he did. They weren't all Twilight Zone stuff. He did other movies, won some awards for some great movies. But you can tell by the dialogue because no one does dialogue like Rod Serling did. And you could distinguish him from all the other writers on Twilight Zone based just on that.
Absolutely, you can.
That's so true.
And that's, even though they're different characters speaking like different characters, there are traits. If you want to get really specific, the number of words per sentence, the types of sentences. Are we using compound, complex, simple, compound, complex? Are we using semicolons and risking throwing the reader out of the story? Are we using exclamation points? Is Molly using
too many ellipses?
Ellipses? You didn't let my ellipses fully develop.
I'm sorry. There was a pause, so I took it.
That was a pregnant pause. There were lots of baby pauses coming out to that. Anyhow, moving on. So all of these things roll together, create style, create voice. And so but we can take those, and now to make things really confusing, there are different types of voices. And within a work, authors are going to use several, possibly not all, but a good portion of them. The writing voices, if you will, are natural, chatter, lyrical, oratorical, and deconstructed. So there's 5 of them. Natural and chatter kind of go together. We're going to try and talk about them. I don't know if we'll get through them all tonight, but we'll see how far we get. And if we don't get up to them all tonight, we'll get to them later, I'm sure. But I want to preface this with a shout out to Diane Sherlock, who attended Antioch University with me. She's got a book coming out real soon too. See if I can get it. I tried to get her on the show, but her schedule is just not conducive. Sadly, she's got she's a very busy life. But she's got a book coming out called Wrestling Alligators. It's going to be fantastic. So this is the work that she did. At Antioch, each student was required to do a seminar, a lecture in their final semester where they taught a class on something. I did it mine on first lines in fiction, hence firsts in fiction. And hers was on voice. And so what we're about to talk about is really the culmination of the notes that I took in her class and the notes that she's shared with me and the work that we've done together. We did write a book together called Right to be Heard, W-R-I-T-E, right. Right.
Clever.
I know. It was my wife's idea, actually. So I'll give her the credit for that. And we talk a little bit about voice in there. So most of this is not because I'm brilliant. It's because Diane is brilliant. And hopefully we'll have her on the show someday. So the first one here is natural voice. And this is the easiest one. This is your straightforward, everyday language. This is by far the most popular form of voice because it's the easiest to write in. Most novels are written in the natural voice simply because it's easy to write and it's easy to read. Now, when I say easy to write, what I mean is it doesn't take any, well, I hate to say that it's easy. It's easier than the others. Can I say that?
No.
Oh, darn it. Well, I'm going to say it anyway. You can arrest me if you'd like to. Some examples here. J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. So when we look at that, what we see is a longer sentence, a bit of a run-on here, but it's natural. It sounds as if somebody's speaking. And here he's actually addressing the reader, right? The narrator is speaking directly to the reader, breaking that fourth wall, if you will, and addressing them with the informal you. But it's a straightforward sentence. It's not super complicated. It's just right there. Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men. And I love me some Cormac McCarthy. Talk about masters of voice. He'll have a passage that reads, "There might not have even been no money." And this is all dialogue, by the way. It's hard to tell because there's no quotation marks around it. But he'll say, "There might not have even been no money." That's possible, but you don't believe it. Bill thought about it. "No," he said, "probably I don't." And I think somebody on the show notes put in quotation marks in a Cormac McCarthy quote.
I was going to ask you about that.
No, this is Cormac McCarthy. He's too good for quotation marks. He
doesn't use quotes, right?
No, he does not. So I don't know. Maybe I put him in there. I'll take the blame for that one. I'll take the fall. Richard Russo's Straight Man. "Truth be told, I'm not an easy man. I can be an entertaining one, though it's been my experience that most people don't want to be entertained. They want to be comforted. And of course, my idea of entertaining might not be yours. I'm in complete agreement with all those people who say regarding movies, I just want to be entertained. This populist position is much derided by my academic colleagues as simple-minded and unsophisticated evidence of questionable and analytical and critical acuity. But I agree with the premise, and I too just want to be entertained. That I am almost never entertained by what entertains other people who just want to be entertained doesn't make us philosophically incompatible. It just means we shouldn't go to movies together." I love that one. Now, if you're really astute, you'll notice that the voice shifted in this passage. So I'm going to ask the audience and or my esteemed colleagues here. Did you catch that? Did you see where the voice was changing in that particular passage?
I did.
Yes, Alton, you in the back. Near the books, with all the books. Well, where does the voice change in this passage, young man?
Well, I don't know, Mr. Gansky, but I think it might be where he shifts some of the terminology. This populist position is much derided by my academic colleagues as simple-minded and unsophisticated, evidence of questionable analytical and critical acuity, which is very different from, truth be told, I'm not an easy man. Is that what you were thinking?
That's exactly it. And now, for some bonus points, by the way, great job, Alton. Were you excited when I called you young man?
I knew it too. I just didn't want to raise my hand in class.
Oh, I know. It can be I'm an intimidating teacher. I really
are.
Just ask any of my ex-students who've dropped out of my class, they'll tell you. Now the next question, follow-up question, bonus points. Why does that particular sentence shift voices?
That's for you, Molly.
Go ahead, Mom.
What?
You got this one.
No. Why does it shift voices?
Yeah, why does he move from this pretty laid back, hey, movies are just for entertainment, to this populist position is much derided by my academic
He
colleagues?
says that it shouldn't make us incompatible. So I'm thinking he starts out by kind of greeting the people that he doesn't really associate with too much, and then trying to bring them up to his level of intellect.
Right.
Is that too deep? I don't know what you're looking for. I
No,
failed.
You're good. You're good. No, you didn't fail. I didn't mean to put anybody on the spot. Just for the record, Pops, you put
Actually,
Molly
I
on the
got
spot.
an A+, so yeah, you send me a box of cookies now. Make up for it, okay?
I'll send them on a plate.
Oh, good. I don't have enough of those.
So, yeah, really what it boils down to is here he's showing off that he can move from one voice to another. And there, I guess if we want to add a third voice, or actually I think we're on sixth voice, an academic voice, you could probably qualify that as an oratorical voice, speech-giving voice, but this is a lot more of an academic type of a tone, in which case we've got a complicated sentence with multiple phrases and clauses, elevated language. And the point here is, look, I can do this. He starts off by saying, I just want to be entertained. Now, the academicians and all the critics would be like, how dare you go see a movie simply to be entertained? It's an art form and blah, blah, blah. So what he's doing here is he's showing I can go between the voices. I've got the everyday voice. Let's go watch a movie. Let's hang out. Let's have some fun. Okay. I'm going to go see a Marvel movie. It's great. Probably not going to come out questioning the way you view the world, but man, there were a lot of explosions and people got punched. It was great, right? By the way, for the record, I love Marvel movies. They do change my life. But at the same rate, you can go see a film that really will change the way you look at the world and make you think about things. And so there is kind of an academic look. So yeah, the shift from one voice to the other is pretty powerful. In this case, he's using voice to demonstrate his control of voice. He's also demonstrating that he can move between them, and he's, I think, mocking. Right?
He's a voice snob.
Yeah, he's mocking the people who are snobs about this kind of a thing. This is how they all talk. They're all uptight and prim and proper. So that one was a little bit fun. Does that make sense, natural voice, for you guys?
Yes.
It does. It does.
Okay. Moving on then, or?
Yeah, you want me to read the chatter one?
Sure.
Well, next on Aaron's list is a sub-voice of what we just described as natural, and it's called chatter. And it's marked by heightened and high-energy voice, any affected or colloquial slang, use of language, whether gangsta or professorial. Really, you put those two words together, did you? Gangsta and professorial.
I think I took that directly from Diane. So she's, Professor Gangster. That's more her thing. But wouldn't that be great, Professor G?
It's, in the sample that Aaron has chosen is from the book called Choke, and it's Chuck Palahniuk's. Am I pronouncing that name right? Do you think?
I believe so. Yeah.
He wrote.
I'm just glad that you read that because I didn't want to pronounce that name.
This is a passage with attitude where you see the voice coming through. If you're going to read this, don't bother. After a couple of pages, you won't want to be here. So forget it. Go away. Get out while you're still in one piece. Save yourself. There has to be something better on television. Or since you have so much time on your hands, maybe you should take a night course. You could make something out of yourself. Treat yourself to a dinner out. Color your hair. You're not getting any younger. What happens here is going to tick you off. After that, it gets worse and worse. And what you're getting here is a stupid story about a stupid little boy, a stupid true life story about nobody you ever want to meet. Picture this little spaz being about waist high with a handful of blonde hair. Ellipse.
And on and on and on. Ellipses, yes.
Ellipses.
Yeah.
Hey, Aaron, who typed up the show notes this week?
That would be me.
Hey, Aaron, who typed up this passage this week?
Molly, that's an academic ellipse, and it's different than what you see in fiction.
Thank you.
I take my moments where I can, okay?
Yeah, that's the ellipse. It shows that there's missing material.
As Professor Gangster would say, pow, pow, pow.
I know, but
Okay,
I was
that's
just
technically
trying
wrong
to...
too, because it should have 4 dots. But anyway, moving on.
Yeah, I guess that would be the end of a sentence. So yes, 4 dots. All right, look, putting in period. Here we go. What do we notice here about this voice? A couple things going on. First of all, this would be considered chatter because even though that first line, if you're going to read this, don't bother, sounds, to me, it echoes Catcher in the Rye. The first thing you'll want to know about me is where I grew up and all that David Copperfield kind of stuff. It's got kind of that same over it type of an attitude. So the tone is coming through very clearly here. This is definitely somebody who knows the voice that they're using, but it's a little more agitated, isn't it? There's a little more, Pops, I think you said, was it aggression or attitude coming through?
Attitude, yeah.
Yeah, some attitude here. It's,
or as we would say, tude.
That dude has tude. That's silly. Okay. But sorry, I'm laughing at my own joke instead of thinking about what I should be saying. So it's got this attitude to it, and it's a heightened emotional state, right? They're irritated, they're bothered. And so he's going to tell the story, but he's kind of irritated and bothered. And so you get these short, choppy sentences. You get things that are very rapid, hard-hitting, very informal, right? Again, this is another one that addresses the reader, breaks that fourth wall, which normally people tell you not to do. Some of these people can get away with it because they do it very, very well. But it's establishing that voice, isn't it? This is one of those stories where the author or the narrator sits down and talks directly with the reader. And so you know what you're getting into. You get words like that little spaz. So we're talking about colloquialisms, slang terms. What happens here first is going to tick you off. We edited that word, by the way. It was a different word, but you know, so picture this little spaz. This is going to tick you off. A handful of blonde hair rather than just you know, with blonde hair. So we're getting just these pretty simple kind of colloquial slang type terms that kind of come through here and make this a little more agitated, a little more high energy, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Moving on. We good? Yes. Thumbs up. All right.
I think so. Now, are you wanting to go through all of these tonight?
Well, we've got about 10 minutes. We did start a minute or two late. The lyrical we might be able to skip because I could probably do an entire episode on lyrical and possibly oratorical. Should we, you know what, maybe we should go to Deconstructed and then save lyrical and oratorical for another week. Does that sound all right?
Fine.
Certainly.
All right. So we're skipping around here. We're just flying by the seat of our pants. I love Deconstructed Voices, and it's actually somewhat appropriate that we're covering this after chatter, because this would be the next step in chatter. This would be moving from a high energy type of a state to one where language starts to break down, which sounds confusing. How can we read and understand if language is broken down? I'll read you some examples. Hopefully it'll help out. But really, Deconstructed Voice is marked by fractured and unconventional broken narratives. Sentences are missing. Punctuation is missing, or perhaps maybe just simply misused. The structure has been taken apart, put together in another way for a particular effect. This is not just haphazard. There's design to this. And perhaps, well, yeah, I'll start with Cormac McCarthy, because in No Country for Old Men. So this is the same book that we pulled from the other example from. So here he's shifted voice to a more deconstructed voice. Again, all dialogue here. Says, I ain't never seen you there. How could you have seen me there if I ain't never been there? I couldn't. I was just saying I ain't. I was agreeing with you. Moss shook his head. They ate. He watched her. Sounds like Hemingway right there. I reckon you're on your way to California. How'd you know that? That's the direction you're headed in. Well, that's where I'm going. So just kind of talking at cross purposes here, not exactly saying the same thing. No punctuation in here at all. There's no apostrophes. Well, I apologize. There are periods. There's a question mark. But the sentences are short. They're choppy. The dialogue is fractured. I ain't never seen you there. How could you have seen me there if I ain't never been there? So very slang type, Southern type of talking. The actual, what's not in dialogue is very simple and short. Ma shook his head. They ate. He watched her. And so you get kind of that breakdown of, in this case, punctuation and language, still readable, but different. This one is a more extreme example. It comes from Vanishing Point by David Markson. And I'm going to read this, and it's not going to make a lot of sense. So make sure you go to aarongansky.com to check out the show notes and see what it looks like, or buy the book if you want to do that as well. Starts off like this: Keats, period. Just one word, just the name of a poet, just not even the full name, just the last name. Keats, wondering aloud where Shakespeare was sitting when he wrote To Be or Not to Be. Now and again, Picasso used the whitewashed walls of rented villas to sketch on. Once a landlord demanded 50 francs for a fresh coat of paint, leaving for Picasso's amusement years later the question of what the man had cost himself. I can't listen to music too often. It makes you want to say stupid nice things, said Lennon. And what? There it is, guys. There it is.
And there you have to be careful, because again, you can lose a reader. So if you're very adept at this kind of thing, and you go over it many times and you read it out loud, you have other people read it and make sure it's strong and that the idea is getting across, then you're good. Otherwise, you can end up losing them, and if it becomes too difficult to read, the readers will put the book up. The worst thing that happens is they can return the book. And that always looks bad, because those get returned back to the publisher, and then that ends up costing you some of your royalties.
Indeed. And this is one of those really tricky ones, again, where you have to work on achieving the proper amount of clarity while still demonstrating through the use of voice the agitation of the character and the hyperactive state, if you will, or the deconstructed thought. You know who did this a lot was the stream of conscience or consciousness writers, Faulkner. And if you've ever read Faulkner, man, you got to have Spark Notes with you to try and get through that thing, because some of his stuff, As I Lay Dying, I'm blanking on some of his other works, A Light in August, some of those other ones. Whoo, man, those stream of consciousness ones are jumping from time to place to character, and a character's in a room and then they're dead and then they're 4 years old again, and it's just super bizarre. Really tough to accomplish. So I'm going to go ahead and say you may want to use this one with extreme caution. I think once you've found your voice and you've got a few novels under your belt, you've got a few books, and you've really studied this and you think you can handle it, and you've read a lot in this type of a genre where you see these voices and you've analyzed it and torn it apart, go ahead and try it out. Try singing other songs. It's fine. It's not going to hurt your voice. It's just going to help you continue to find your own. So try it on. But again, if it doesn't fit, maybe we don't use it. At least not right away. Not until you lose a few pounds. Because if it doesn't fit, I just called all of our listeners fat.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is where Molly tells us whether or not there are questions. He said, trying to get Aaron out of this bind.
Thank you. That was seamless.
There's no questions. There's no questions. There's comments. Dave Fessenden was in the room. He liked Rod Serling. He said, presented for your consideration, ellipses. And then he says, for a pregnant pause, use a real fat ellipsis.
He said those in bold, yeah.
Bruce Brady checked in, said hi. We had
Bruce
Jacqueline Patterson and Andy Clapp was in the room. And Jenny Snow checked in at first to watch for the Ask the Author question, but then she logged out to listen because she could either listen or watch, and she couldn't do both.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah.
We look that bad.
She didn't want to read our lips.
She couldn't be in the chat room and watch the podcast at the same time, so she chose to watch it instead of just listening to it. So
got it. Excellent.
yeah.
Well, very cool. Next week we got a different thing up here. We are going to get back to voices, but next week marks the release of my new novel, Who is Harrison Sawyer?
Yay.
So we're going to talk not necessarily just about the book, but about the process of publication, the journey that I took, because that book, that's got a bit of a backstory. That was one that kind of came out of left field, and I think it turned out okay. It's a lot of fun. So we'll talk a little bit about that next week. We'll continue on with more voices the following week. So you want to make sure that you're here for both of those. Now, I probably will not be doing a Facebook book launch like I normally do. I may try and work that into our cast. So I'll try and get the word out via Facebook, etc., so you guys can all be in the right place, the right time, and contribute and talk and ask questions and just join in the celebration of that. So we do hope that you'll join us next week to talk about that journey that I took in writing that. And don't forget.
Let me add to that, because I want people to understand this. This isn't a promotional thing we're doing next week just to promote your book. Of course, when we talk about it, that's going to happen. But the purpose is really for our viewers, our listeners to understand is that every book has a backstory to it. It has history that most readers don't get to find out about. They just pick up the book and they enjoy it or they don't enjoy it. But those of us that are doing the writing kind of thing and those that are trying to break into publication know that there is story about how the book came to be. And this particular book has some interesting things that happened, including, your doubts about whether or not it would ever be published and how you handled those things. So that's what we're really going to talk about is the things you don't get to see when a book comes out, what led to the book actually being published. Should be fun.
Mm-hmm.
It will. I did have, as you mentioned, Pops, I had several doubts about this particular one, and I'll share the story why. I mean, my confidence was really shaken, many much moosin, shaky. Anyhow, at some point, my confidence was less than 100% on this book, and I'll explain where that came from, etc. So we do hope that you'll join us for that. It will be educational. It'll be a lot of fun. And just to remind you, you can always ask the author at aarongansky.com, or you can do it via email or on Facebook or Twitter, etc. And if you're looking for Pops, you can find him at altongansky.com. You can find Molly Jo at franklyMyDearMojo.com. And you can find me at aarongansky.com. So we thank you all for listening. And until next week, good writing.